I'm speaking on the wonderful animated film Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind by Hayao Miyazaki. My presentation is called Ecofutures and the Anthropogenic Encroachment, Contemporary Reflections Thereupon. When we approach the solarpunk genre as the green antithesis of cyberpunk, you might be quick to imagine a world with extensive technological advancements with an ecological twist, thereby exploring utopian potentialities with an optimism lacking in contemporary thought. Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind brings such eco-technological visions closer to the human experience, presenting a world with recognizable technologies rather than those of a far-off future. As such, Nausicaa takes the focus from the technologies at hand to instead focus on the underlying ideologies and systems, thereby adhering to key tenets of the solarpunk genre, which, as fellow panelist Philip M. Crosby described in Toward an Anti-Utopia, center around community rather than the individual, on environmental sustainability rather than the environmental degradation, on social justice rather than subjugation and inequality, and on optimism rather than nihilism. Nausicaa allows the viewer to step into a world that explores the confrontation of the anthropocentric status quo through an eco-harmonious alternative that embodies these aforementioned qualities. 40 years on, Nausicaa's warnings remain as prescient and pressing, if not more so, to step into Nausicaa's footsteps in the fight against the anthropocenic machine that marches on. Exploring speculative futures serve to provide the observer with the potential paths that humanity might either embark upon, deviate from, or suffer at the hands of, based on the current ideologies and actions. The anthropocentric drives propagating and upholding the worldwide systems of techno-capitalist production and consumption are paving the way to humanity's demise and nature therewith. Ecologically minded media tends to explore precisely this imaginary, namely the shared end of humans and the natural world, conforming to anthropocentric visions as described by Morton, which strive to disconfirm the end of the world. Their rhetoric of ecological and apocalypticism revels in the idea that nature will be permanently gone. We imagine our own death via nature. It is precisely in this regard that Nausicaa deviates from the eco-dystopian norm, instead presenting a world in which nature is endeavoring to heal that which humanity polluted. This healing does not, however, necessitate the continued survival of humanity, thereby aiming to subvert the anthropocentrism rife in contemporary ecological thought, and instead providing an ecocentric vision. As such, Nausicaa aligns with Clarke's contention of what eco-critics endeavor to bring about, namely a new cosmopolitanism, transcending given cultural, natural, economic, and social boundaries, the accomplishment of a sort of communal super-subjectivity, a peaceful future epoch with humanity as the mindful steward of life on Earth. Similar such cooperative efforts were imagined as a response to COVID-19, which Zizek explained could give birth to global solidarity. Our petty differences become insignificant, and we all work together to find a solution. On the contrary, the point is to reflect upon the sad fact that we need a catastrophe to be able to rethink the very basic features of the society in which we live. To better understand this vision, Nausicaa juxtaposes its low-tech solarpunk with a more familiar diesel punk opposite, embodied by the Tolmekian kingdom. Herein, the viewer finds anthropocentrism through the fuel-guzzling, warmongering, pollution-peddling, self-serving human systems that are both prevalent in and governing of contemporary systems. Accordingly, I argue that in 40 years since its release, Nausicaa's message of eco-future alternatives being worth confronting established socio-economic and ideological systems for remains critical to ensure human survival. Nausicaa's world is a post-human one, having lost its anthropocenic supremacy through a series of man-made ecological catastrophes which have left humanity in a position of bare survival. The first of these were initiated by the giant warriors, personifications of thermonuclear weaponry both within and without human control, and since then remaining humans have attempted to regain control over the Earth through various means. But having lost that Darwinian throne, they now find new obstacles on their path. Human pollution ultimately led to the birth of the Sea of Decay, a toxic forest that slowly encroaches upon human settlements and its giant insect inhabitants, chief among which are the colossal Omu. Rather than something exclusive to the realms of fiction, the quotidian human experience already cannot exist without engaging with the results of its own pollution of the natural world. As per Vogel, in the context of phenomena like global warming, warming, every spot on Earth has already been changed by human action. So nature can be said to already have ended. Meanwhile, the encroaching toxic spores can still be held at bay by Nausicaä's Valley people, while the real world does not allow one to avoid the growing number of, for example, CO2 particles per million in the atmosphere. For context, when Nausicaa was released, these numbered 344 parts per million. When I was born, it was 363. When I started writing about it, it was 419 in January 2024, and it has now reached 426. Meanwhile, the carbon threshold was put at 400. Now, I posit that the sea of decay and its actants are Anthropogenic errors made tangible, translating these difficult to grasp concepts into palpable matters in favor of inspiring engagement and action. In analyzing the work of Miyazaki, Morgan states that increasingly the imbalance between humanity and nature has manifested itself in the forms of natural disasters, oil spills, temperature extremes, and chemicals that have found pathways into the food chain. Within Nausicaa, these impactful man-made disasters, instead of presenting as oil slicks that render rivers and woodlands barren, are given the agency to directly engage with the humanity that caused them. Herein, Nausicaa converts these contemporary concepts of unimaginable impact and longevity, which Morton refers to as hyperobjects, into distinct actants that actively exist within the otherwise exclusively anthropocenic loop of ecological effects. These hyperobjects are things that are massively distributed in time and space relative to humans and could be the biosphere, the sum total of all nuclear materials on Earth, the very long-lasting product of direct human manufacture such as styrofoam or plastic bags, or the sum of all the whirring machinery of capitalism. Now, one could imagine that Nausicaa's toxic spores, pervasive and invasive as they are akin to the microplastics, pesticides, and current-day forever chemicals seeping into the ground, water, air, and even into our bodies. These all serve, however, to rid the Earth of humanity and its polluting forces while allowing other life, such as the Sea of Decay and its Omu wards, to not merely exist but thrive and, as the film reveals, clean up the Earth in the process. Accordingly, hyperobjects and these fictional echoes thereof serve to demand introspection, drawing into question core ideas of what it means to exist, what Earth is, what society is. And herein Nausicaa subverts the problem of hyperobjects, namely their difficulty to grasp as an individual, and puts humanity on a path to realize its own role within the creation and pervasion thereof. Now again, Vogel explains that we are alienated from our environment when we fail to recognize it as the consequence of our own actions and so fail to acknowledge our own responsibility for it. So instead, it starts to look like a natural fact about which there is nothing we can do. Global warming is simply part of a natural cycle, pollution an inevitable byproduct of technology, urban sprawl the inexorable consequence of market forces, and so on. This contemporary lack of understanding is further meddled in attempting to assign blame, wherein the powers that be endeavor to measure individual impact and minimize actions taken regarding the capitalist cogs that must needs continue moving. This same problem is this same problem is laid bare by Zizek in relation to the recent COVID-19 pandemic, stating that the problem with this is the same as the journalism dealing with the environmental crisis. The media overemphasize our personal responsibility for the problem, demanding that we pay more attention to recycling and other behavioral issues. Such a focus on individual responsibility, necessary as it is to some degree, functions as ideology the moment it serves to obfuscate the bigger questions of how to change our entire economic and social system. In the same vein, Morton explains the difficulty of understanding compounding individual actions on the scale of a species, which, when scaled up to include billions of those self-same actions, cause precisely the harm to the Earth that the individual might not grasp that they participate in as a responsible member of the Anthropocenic species. The underlying drive, however, remains that of the system at large, the ideology that drives these billions of individual actions through the ever-marching machine of capitalism that demands endless production and consumption. Nausicaa provides contemporary viewers with a glimpse at an eco-future alternative in the form of the valley and its inhabitants, living peacefully with nature, not subjugating it, and developing choice technologies for the improvement of the citizens' lives without sacrificing the environment in the process. This peace is disturbed by invading Tolmekian forces, embodying the techno-industrial status quo still present today, but they are rebuffed by the titular princess, Nausicaa, and their ways of life and thinking are drawn into question. Similarly, Miyazaki expresses a desire for this same status quo to come to an end, stating that he's excited about that. Money and desire, all that is going to collapse, and wild green grasses are going to take over. Accordingly, while Nausicaa shows the difficulty of changing systems and ideologies for the betterment of humanity and the environment alike, it allows it to claim victory through means of empathy and understanding, thereby showing that such changes are worth fighting for. Nausicaa's valley exists on the precipice of succumbing to either the ever-expanding sea of decay or Anthropogenic industrialism, which brought that sea of decay about to begin with. Personified in the antagonistic kingdoms like Tolmekia and Pejite, and in between these two extremes, Nausicaa and her Valley of the Wind provide a respite from both techno-industrialism and environmental decline. Nausicaa's Valley is a sort of low-tech solarpunk commune, finding the means of eco-friendly technological progress and a respect for the environment that is found in their architecture, industrial structures, and agrarian stewardship. Nausicaa's castle is a monument to their way of life. Being hewn from a rock and steepled by two windmills, it looks over the valley as its farms and mills follow the landscape, with brooks bubbling alongside. Nausicaa's glider, and the many that are shown at the end of the film, show a low-impact mode of travel. Her retrieval of omu eyes and shells for tools and other items ties the valley people closely to nature, and that topical usage of fire to deal with toxic spores rather than acre-wide pesticides that have caused countless deaths and decay in the real world showcase the valley's ecocentric ideology. The acknowledgement of humanity's role therein sets Nausicaa and her valley apart from the Tolmekians and their kin. Nausicaa approaches the supposedly toxic flora and the insects with compassion and curiosity, going out of her way to avoid harming them and instead trying to retain the world's fragile balance. She experiments with the flora by growing them in pure water and soil drawn from deep within the earth, concluding that it is not the forest that is toxic and that the pollution lies in the earth itself, even the earth of our valley, which results in her questioning who made such a terrible mess of the world. Herein, she showcases the much-needed introspection and critical approach to Anthropogenic behavior which caused this posthuman state of the world. She attempts to share this perspective with a Pejide commander when he aims to sacrifice the valley and burn the Sea of Decay, much as the Tolmekians endeavor to, demanding reflection of human dependence on the world and highlighting that the forest is responsible for purifying the pollution humans caused. In the real world, humans have largely failed to act with forethought, instead opting to react to disasters as they happen rather than acting preemptively to avoid them. This is the guiding philosophy of green capitalist approaches, which, as per Buller, are predicated on the continuation of the destructive processes, systems, and economic relations that have both delivered us into this state of crisis and severely delayed action to stimulate. Nausicaa counters these ideologies by attempting to right the underlying wrongs rather than brute force her way through the superficial symptoms as the Tolmekians would. Rather than planting trees to offset oil spills, Nausicaa demands that humanity breaks down the systems that spilled the oil to begin with. Through the fictional Tolmekians, Miyazaki captures the non-fictional anthropocentrism that has the potential to bring about a similarly eco-dystopian state in the real world. Lisboa, in analysing apocalyptic fictions, explains that in the aftermath of cataclysms, a new, although not very different or necessarily better, world is built, but in reality, the deep structures of the new world often have inbuilt in them prototypes of old errors repeated indefinitely. As such, the Tolmekians are said to repeat the errors of their forebears, and humanity, adversely, does not need to follow in these footsteps. Rather than wait for a catastrophe after which to repeat our mistakes, the existing systems need to be reconfigured to prevent a cataclysm from occurring. These themes are countered in the film throughout the Valley Kingdom in opposition to the Tolmekian anthropocentric ideologies. It is present in the Valley's communal approach to labor and living, Nausicaa's empathic approach to the insects and their peace, her overarching approach to friends and foes alike to find a cooperative way forward, and ultimately in her attempt to avert disaster by putting herself in front of the raging Omu and personify the optimism and hope of a symbiotic eco-future, as opposed to a newly revived human supremacy held up by the fragility of a nuclear-esque destruction. When Lord Yupa first searches for Nausicaa in his secret garden, he comes across stored pieces of armor and weaponry, and the Tomikians find stored gunplanes elsewhere, which the Valley people seemed to have put away in favor of focusing on social systems as opposed to warfare, whether with humans or the Omo. As such, while the Valley people seemingly possess the means of destructions like the Tomikians and the Pejite, they opt not to use these tools of war, focusing their innovations on improving the well-being of the people and the Valley alike. Equally so, Lord Yupa himself, who's known to be a great swordsman in the land, shows great restraint when defending Nausicaa, choosing to stop the fight in favor of talking rather than shedding blood unnecessarily. In doing so, he also stops Nausicaa from fighting, quelling her rage in favor of the restraint he knows she is capable of. As such, these choices, which culminate in Nausicaa's self-sacrifice to stop the Omu stampede and her subsequent resurrection by the Omu, results in the paving of a new way forward centered around the Valley's eco-harmonic solarpunk ideology. The viewer is shown Tomikian airships leaving the Valley without further bloodshed, new gliders adorning the Valley, and a single green sprout growing in the Sea of Decay where Nausicaa's cowl had fallen. Wordlessly, the viewer is shown that these humans have earned a new lease of life, and that Nausicaa's death was the death of anthropocentrism, the stopping of a self-destructive cycle. To conclude, the eco-future portrayed by Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is fought for and earned, presenting a harmonious way forward that demands the reconfiguring of human systems and ideologies present in contemporary social politics if it is to be mirrored in the real world. For Miyazaki, a proper valuation of human life seems to involve accurately seeing and assessing humanity's existence in the full light of its consequences, our eyes unclouded by the bias of speciesism. Utopian studies have brought to light the manner in which fictional utopia moves the reader to act to bring about the ideal society presented in the utopian text. 40 years on, it is therefore to be hoped that Nausicaa's example might be followed contemporarily to avoid bringing about a non-fictional post-human world in turn. Thank you so much.